right, let's get to the Canadian Online Streaming Act. And let's just talk about this Online Streaming Act here that they've got going on. Now, people are, this ultimately, what they're trying to do is they're trying to regulate podcasting in Canada. They traditionally, regulators have regulated television, they've regulated radio. One of the main reasons why they've regulated these things is because, and it's important to understand this, to understand then why this new online streaming act, where they want to then now regulate online streaming platforms, why this is so alarming is because it doesn't fit the reasoning behind regulating TV and radio to begin with. The whole reasoning, now I come out of terrestrial radio, I spent much of my career in it. The reason why they regulate it is because you're on the airwaves, you're in a car, right? So you're driving in your car and anybody could flip through and you're just flipping and flipping and flipping. And you don't know what you're going to hear as you're flipping through the radio stations. Same thing with television. You don't know as you're flipping through what you're going to end up seeing. So they regulate it in order to ensure that it's like family friendly, that you're not putting something out there at the during certain hours where kids are going to be really active watching TV. You know, they don't want like really sexual shows on TV at 3 o'clock in the afternoon where when kids are coming home and they're turning on the TV and they're going through all the channels looking for cartoons. And then suddenly they see like Howard Stern's old show on E, if you remember what that was like, where he had like prostitutes and porn stars like doing all kinds of weird stuff. You don't want to see that. And same thing with the radio. You don't want to hear certain things at certain hours. And so it's regulated because it's on these airwaves that anyone can access and they stumble on and they don't necessarily have a choice on what they're hearing at that moment. Now, of course, they could always flip away, but it's a little too late when the little one's already there and they've already heard it and it's like, oh, or they already saw it and it's like, oh, crap. So that was kind of the idea behind this regulation that there was like the 7 deadly words in radio you're not allowed to say. There really wasn't any content you couldn't talk about. It was just during certain times with certain audiences. You know, you had to, the FCC here in the United States would regulate that a bit. So Canada has something very, very similar to that. But now they're going a step further and they're wanting to regulate streamers. Now, this doesn't make any sense because when it comes to a podcast, you have to actually click on it and choose to listen to that. It's not like you're flipping through some government issued airwaves that are rented out by these broadcasters that any little kid could just suddenly flip through. You have to actively go to these websites. You have to know the websites. You have to type in them into your browser. You have to actively go to those sites. And then you have to actively look around for whatever it is you want to see or listen to. It's very different than just accidentally stumbling on it because you have a TV and a radio. So that is why this is particularly concerning. But they've passed this streaming act now without really any debate, without really any, they're really, it was just by decree, basically, from Justin Trudeau. One of the most scary parts of the legislation, basically, the Online Streaming Act says that all online streaming services that offer podcasts must formally register with the government to permit regulatory controls. So if you make over $10 million in annual broadcasting revenue, if you offer broadcasting content, and if you operate in Canada, then you have to now register with the government so that you can be regulated. Now, they haven't really defined what that regulation will be, but they've given a little bit of a glimpse. And one of the glimpses is, it says, quote, "The commission may make orders imposing conditions, including the presentation of programs and programming services for the selection by the public, including the showcasing and the discoverability of Canadian programs." So they're trying to paint this as, oh, this is good for Canada because we're going to elevate and promote Canadian shows and Canadian podcasters. But in the same breath, then what do? Is they demonize Rumble, right? A Canadian company. And they demonize and say that Rumble is a platform for extremists, spreading disinformation, trying to get advertisers ripped off of Rumble because they won't deplatform Russell Brand, for example. So there's this double speak going on where they're saying, well, this is going to be good for Canada because it's going to be about elevating Canadians. Meanwhile, all of the mainstream media is going on a full court press to attack Rumble, a Canadian company, which I don't know if I know Rumble has offices in the United States, but I don't know if they're making a full on. After this, I'd be like, hey, why don't I hope you guys are moving out of Canada entirely because I don't know about this. I do want to play this video for you though. So this isn't, there's not complete consensus in Canada. It's not like everybody in Canada is like, yay, censorship, yay, regulate podcasts. There are some dissenters on this. Watch this. I think we have this, right?
Senator Husakos.
Senator Gold, your government repeatedly said that user-generated content would not be regulated by Bill C-11. Actually, you explicitly ruled out the regulation of podcasts. And on May 12th of this year, the CRTC released a Myths and Facts communique stating that concerns over the regulation of podcasts was a myth, and that anyone who creates a podcast isn't a broadcaster under this law. But quietly last Friday, the very same regulator announced that podcasts must be registered with your government. Senator Gold, for a government supposedly consumed by misinformation and disinformation, this government continues to engage in it. Why were Canadians lied to in this manner by the Trudeau government and the CRTC?
Senator Gold.
Canadians were not lied to by the government or the CRTC. My understanding is this is the first stage of the first stage within the regulatory process, and the criteria that will ultimately develop, as I understand it, will include, as colleagues would recall from our debates, the extent or degree to which initiatives on platforms can be considered properly broadcasters, and that also includes the extent of their reach and of their revenues. And so it's simply not correct to attribute this stage of the regulatory process as a lie.
Your government continues to say, as does the CRTC, that digital creators are not being regulated, that platforms are. The reality of the matter is that's the equivalent of saying books aren't being regulated, but bookstores are. This is insanity, Senator Gold, and it has to stop. And at the end of the day, if the CRTC doesn't clearly understand what the government's intention is with this bill, will you give clear directive? Or is this just another mess that Pierre Poilievre will have to clean up when he becomes Prime Minister?
Hear, hear.
Senator Gold.
Well, I certainly won't comment on what Pierre Poilievre, what mess he will clean up, create, or otherwise, if and when he becomes Prime Minister. But again, Bill C-11 was a subject of rigorous study and debate in this chamber. We did our job well. We studied it, we improved it with our amendments. The other House considered them, and the bill was passed into law. It is now further processes underway, and I have confidence in them.
Yeah. So again, they're not clear on exactly how they're going to regulate these podcasts. They don't even know why they're regulating them. They're just saying, oh, no, it's going to be good for Canada. We have to combat extremism and hate. And we need to be doing, we need to also, it sounds like, milk money from these, potentially from these podcasts. I'm not sure exactly if they're going to be charging fees or, who knows exactly what they're doing with this. And that's one of the big problems, is that there's a lot of unknowns. But whenever there's regulation, especially when it comes to something like this, where there's really no need for this type of regulation, whenever there is going to be regulation, you know that there's going to be censorship. That is just where it's going to follow. Now, even in radio and television, there's censorship. It wasn't necessarily censorship of ideas. It was different because radio and television, not anyone could just jump on TV and have a TV show. Not anybody could just jump on the radio and have a radio show. You actually had to be invited or hired, right, by a major media company in order to do that. So it was already regulated in a lot of ways. They were able to keep the conspiracy theorists and dangerous disinformation spewers, they were able to keep them away and just have establishment-y people the entire time because they were employed by these major media outlets. That is not the same thing these days. The online, the internet podcasting world is the wild, wild west, and anyone can start a podcast if they've just got a computer that has a mic and a camera on the computer. They don't even have to have a camera. If they just have any equipment at all, they could start a podcast. And that is scary to these people in power who do not want to have the people's voices elevated. The people's voices are being heard. And what's really interesting about this is that they're doing this at a time when viewers' trust is at an all-time low in traditional media. People do not trust the traditional news media. They do not trust the publishers anymore, or the CNNs or the MSNBCs of the world, or the Fox Newses. They don't trust these outlets, and they are looking for alternatives, and those alternatives are becoming more popular and louder, and people are listening to them, and the powers that be find that dangerous, and they want to regulate it. And what that really means is they want to censor it, and that is something that should scare us all. We're going to keep following that story, of course. But first, let me tell you about Moink meat. So I am a meat eater. I know there are a lot of people out there that are vegans. I am not one of them. I do like to eat meat, but I like to know that when I'm eating meat, I do have, I feel bad about it for a variety of reasons. One, I don't like the fact that 60% of U.S. pork comes from one company that is owned by the Chinese here in this country. I think that that is a very dangerous thing. That also, the hogs are given something called ractopamine, which is banned in 160 countries, including China. Yet, oh, we have it here in our grocery stores, and that's what we're buying every day. I like to know that my meat is coming from local farmers or, family farms, I would say. It doesn't matter where they are, quite frankly, as long as they're family farms, and as long as they're raising the meat right, they're feeding the animals correctly, they're treating them correctly while they're living, and that when it's that bad day for that animal, when that day comes, it's not done in a harsh, inhumane way. That is just the way I prefer to eat my meat. So that's why I really like Moink meat. And Moink, by the way, stands for moo plus oink, which is kind of cute. Moink delivers grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured pork and chicken. I know in the past I've said pasteurized. I was wrong on that. It's pastured. And sustainable wild-caught Alaskan salmon, and they will send it straight to your door. I have my box. We've been eating from it. It is really great. I love the salmon. So far we've had the salmon, we've had the ground beef, which is fantastic. We've had some of the steaks. So everything is really, really delicious. But Moink farmers farm like our grandparents did. And as a result, Moink meat tastes like it should, because the family farm simply just does it better. So the Moink difference is a difference that you can taste, and you can feel good knowing that you're helping family farms stay financially independent, because they're being shut down by all of those big foreign companies that are coming in and buying them up. So we want to really keep American farmers afloat, and this is a really great way to do it. Plus, you can feel good about the meat that you're eating, knowing that it's not coming from one of those really terrible places that just will give you nightmares. But you could get really great things in your Moink box, like rib eyes, chicken breasts, pork chops, salmon fillets, and much more. Plus, you can cancel at any time. So keep American farming going by signing up at moinkbox.com/Kim, and you'll get a free year supply of ground beef. Well, you'll get a free packet of ground beef actually in each box for 1 year. And it's delicious ground beef. So you definitely want to sign up, because that's what you'll get if you sign up now. These listeners of this show right now, you'll get that free ground beef that'll be thrown into every box. And it'll be the best ground beef that you've ever tasted. So again, go to moinkbox.com/Kim.